You feel guilty, not because you did something terrible, but because someone looked disappointed, because you said no, because you needed space, because you chose yourself for once. And suddenly the feeling appears again, that heavy pressure in your chest, like you've done something wrong, even when you haven't. You replay the moment. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. Maybe I made things harder for them. Maybe I should have handled it differently. And slowly the same conclusion appears again. It must be my fault. But what if that feeling didn't start in the moment you're in now? What if the guilt you feel today is not actually about what just happened? What if it started much earlier, when you were just a child, trying to understand the reactions of the adults around you? For many people, guilt didn't start with doing something wrong. It started with a child quietly learning that their natural impulses could create tension. And once a child learns that, something subtle begins to change. They don't stop caring, they start adapting. A child is born with a powerful drive toward autonomy. They want to explore, to move freely, to try things themselves. You can see it in small children everywhere. I do it myself. They want to climb things, touch things, experiment. They want to discover what they are capable of. Because during early childhood, a child begins to develop something essential, a sense of autonomy, the feeling that I am allowed to exist in my own way. I can act, I can explore, I can try. But the way adults respond to that exploration matters more than we often realize. Imagine a young child trying to do something on their own. They try to put on their shoes, they spill something, they make noise, they interrupt, they try to help with something they can't quite manage yet. These are normal moments in childhood, but sometimes the responses from adults can slowly send a different message. Stop doing that. You're making a mess. Don't touch that. Why are you doing it like that? You're doing it wrong. Often these reactions are not meant to harm the child. They come from stress, from exhaustion, from time pressure. But for a young child, the interpretation can be very different because children don't yet separate themselves from the reactions of adults. Instead of thinking, my parent is stressed, a child often experiences something much more personal, something like, I did something wrong. And when this happens repeatedly during the years when autonomy is forming, a subtle emotional pattern can begin to develop. The child still wants to explore, but now something else appears alongside that impulse. A small hesitation, a moment of doubt. Maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. Maybe I'm making things harder. This is where guilt can begin to quietly take root. Not the healthy guilt that comes from harming someone, but a deeper emotional pattern. The feeling that your actions themselves might be problematic. And when that pattern forms early enough, it often follows a person into adulthood. Later in life, the same child becomes an adult who is extremely aware of how their actions affect other people. They notice every shift in mood, every pause in conversation, every small sign that someone might be uncomfortable. And when that happens, the old pattern activates almost automatically. Did I do something wrong? Did I make things harder? Should I fix this? And suddenly, the emotional responsibility of the situation feels like it belongs to you. You might apologize quickly, even when nothing actually happened. You might explain yourself more than necessary, trying to prevent misunderstandings, trying to make sure no one feels burdened by you. You might replay conversations in your mind for hours, searching for the moment where you might have caused discomfort. And over time, guilt can begin to show up in surprising places. You feel guilty for resting, guilty for asking for help, guilty for saying no, guilty for disappointing someone, sometimes even guilty for having needs at all. But there is another layer to this that many people don't realize. Sometimes the guilt you feel today is not actually about responsibility. It is about safety. When you were a child, the emotional atmosphere around you mattered. If a parent became tense, disappointed, or overwhelmed, your nervous system immediately registered it. Because for a child, tension in the environment can feel dangerous. So your brain began to learn something very subtle. If I adjust myself, things calm down. If I make it easier for them, everything becomes safer. If I take responsibility, the tension disappears. And slowly, guilt became more than just an emotion. It became a strategy, a way to stabilize the emotional environment, a way to protect connection. But strategies that protect us as children often remain active long after the situation has changed. Your nervous system may still be trying to stabilize emotional situations that were never actually yours to carry, which means that sometimes the guilt you feel today is not telling you that you did something wrong. It is simply an old protection system activating again. There is another moment when guilt often appears. Not when you hurt someone, but when you finally stand up for yourself. You say something honest. You set a boundary. You express that something doesn't work for you, and almost immediately, the feeling appears again. That uncomfortable pressure, that quiet voice in your mind saying, maybe that was too much. Maybe I was too direct. Maybe I made things harder. For people who learned early in life to keep the emotional atmosphere stable, standing up for themselves can feel strangely wrong, not because it is wrong, but because it is unfamiliar. Your system learned that keeping the peace was safer than expressing discomfort. So the moment you speak up, your nervous system reacts, not with relief, but with guilt, even if what you said was completely reasonable, even if the other person understands. The old pattern still activates, because somewhere inside, a younger part of you still believes, if I create tension, something will go wrong. But learning to tolerate that moment of discomfort is an important step in healing. Because healthy relationships can survive honesty. They can survive boundaries. They can survive someone saying, this doesn't work for me. And the more often you allow yourself to speak honestly, even when guilt appears, the more your system slowly learns something new. That taking up space does not destroy connection. And once you begin to see that, something important becomes possible. You can start to pause when guilt appears. Instead of immediately assuming you did something wrong, you can ask a different question. Did I actually harm someone? Or am I simply taking up space? For many people, that question changes everything, because often the guilt was never about harm. It was about permission. Permission to exist, permission to need something, permission to disappoint someone, permission to be human. Healing from chronic guilt rarely happens in one dramatic moment. It happens slowly, through small shifts, through noticing when guilt appears, through questioning the old assumption that your needs create problems, through allowing yourself to experiment with something new, speaking up, taking space, allowing yourself to be imperfect, and learning that relationships do not collapse when you do. Because the guilt you feel today may have started with a child trying to keep the world around them stable, but as an adult, you are no longer responsible for holding everything together. And sometimes, the most healing thing you can learn is that relationships don't break. When you stop carrying everything alone, sometimes they finally become real.